Taylor Swift with Karma. Welcome back. It is the Country Viewpoint here on your Colour of Country Life, Flow FM. It is National Agriculture Week, and joining me on the line now is the President of the Victorian Farmers Federation, Emma Germano, and she's got a extensive background in agriculture herself, and we've got plenty to discuss. It's great to welcome you back to the airwaves. Emma, how are you?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, good, thank you.
Excellent. Well, not only are you, of course, the VFF president, but you're the managing director of your family mixed farm operation, I Love Farms. Why don't we just start with some rhetoric on National Ag Week? So obviously it's, runs thick in your blood. So tell us more about your whole vast background in the ag industry.
Farmer. I mean, I've always got to convince people that I'm a farmer, and I choose on any given day whether or not I'm saying, yes, I absolutely am a farmer, and what does it all mean? So I think it's interesting, actually, if we just reflect on where the food comes from and who we actually acknowledge as being food producers. It's great to have a day where you raise awareness. I think it's really important that that's not just a day where we celebrate amongst ourselves, but certainly connect in with a community of people who probably don't understand so much about where their food and fibre comes from these days. But really do want to know. And I think that's having, even that's being really amplified by the fact that at the moment there are so many Australians that can't afford their regular shopping that they would normally put in their trolley, and they're really starting to think, well, hang on, why does food cost this much, and where does the money go in the supply chain? So Ag Day is a great time for us just to stop and go, oh yeah, where does our food come from? And nice that there's little activations happening around the parts. But again, we're pretty good at celebrating ourselves. As an industry, we've always got a conference on, and there's committees, and there's 200 plus organisations that do agricultural advocacy in this country. Really good to connect with the people that we're feeding on Ag Day.
What are some of the ways in which this will be sort of celebrated in your home state of Victoria?
Oh, it's a good question. So there's lots of little activations going on and long lunches and things like that. The VFF's actually out on the road. We're going to be in Sale for Ag Day, so we'll be connecting on social media and that sort of thing, but getting out to some farmers who are members of ours and non-members of ours, actually just still talking about what we need to be doing across Victoria from an advocacy perspective, which is, of course, the number one job of the Victorian Farmers Federation. It's actually to find out what the problems are and start feeding solutions into government. And sometimes we have to feed the same solutions into government over and over and over again, but it's so important that there is a voice of farmers to the community and to the policy and decision makers, because we see how much of an impact policy decisions are having on farmers in regards to the way that they farm, but then of course how that flows on to consumers, and the biggest problem always being that farmers are price takers. So it's great government gives us a new bit of policy or red tape or legislation that we've got to comply with, and it's not always as simple as saying, well, we'll just add that to the bill when we sell our wares wherever we're selling them in the market. So again, Ag Day is a really good opportunity for us just to kind of explain how the money flows through the supply chain and how those decisions of government impact every Australian. And, we talk about farmer advocacy or doing things that, makes it easier for farmers to farm. But really, when we get farming advocacy and policy right, it's actually really good for the whole country. And I think we've got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's superb to hear that, Emma, and important to have those conversations. Well, why don't you let us in on some of the conversations being had right now as far as the dry conditions go with the current harvest? What's the lay of the land like right now there in your home state? I
think in some parts of the state it's looking like a very good harvest, and it's off the back of a couple of years of a decent grain harvest. We can see how much the international market plays into the success of farmers here at home, and obviously, or unfortunately, there's conflict around the world that is making Australian products, more and more appealing to the global market. And I think we've got to bear that in mind. We've got to be making sure that we're creating or doing agriculture from the perspective of there's a whole globe out there of people who want to eat our food and our take our fibre, and making sure that we keep those markets open. In regards to the weather, if only I had a crystal ball. I actually said to someone yesterday, my hot tip is it's going to be dry for this many years. And they said, you should always probably go with facts. And I thought, well, that's the thing. We're always projecting forward what's going to happen. I guess the the thing that makes a lot of farmers nervous right now is that they've seen how quickly we go from wet to dry, and really significantly. You go from drought to flooding rains, and flooding rains back to drought again. So as much as there's a bit of fear in the market, and I think that that's having a big impact on the livestock prices, so we can criticise some farmers for hitting the panic button, which is impacting those prices. But of course, otherwise we get criticised for not preparing for the dry. So a lot of people are going into what they anticipate to be a dry period with probably a bit more preparedness in mind. And so we're doing that at a farm level, and we need to see that both at a state and a federal government level of always preparing for the next dry or the next wet, and making sure that we've got really resilient communities that can cope with these weather events.
Emma Germano, the president of the Victorian Farmers Federation, will continue this conversation right after this short break. It's the third hour of the Wednesday Country Viewpoint here on Flow FM. You too with Atomic City, and welcome back. It's the Country Viewpoint here on your colour of country life, Flow FM. I've got Emma Germano on the line, the Victorian Farmers Federation president. Now, Emma, you had plenty to say the last time we spoke to you about water buybacks. Since that time, I've spoken to one of the commissioners who was an author in the review as to the fact that, well, from what their findings were, the last 10 years of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan has been less productive than it should be. So given that there's all these strong sentiments out there right now, what have you got to say about the latest direction on water buybacks?
Look, we know simply, it's a contentious issue. I think part of the problem is it's not an issue that necessarily resonates with where the majority of the voters are. So in metropolitan cities, they don't quite understand the Murray-Darling Basin or what's it all about, and it's complicated to understand. I guess really simply for me, I look at it and I say, well, you know what, we can recover water out of the Murray River, but you can't get it to flow backwards up the Darling River. So it's pretty frustrating, particularly for farmers up in the north of Victoria, to be watching programs where we've got a federal environment minister, kind of the story of, oh, look at all of the fish kills. And it's like, well, if those fish kills didn't happen on the Murray River where you're potentially going to be buying back water from, it just seems like a zero-sum conversation where we say, well, it's only voluntary and it's fine to buy back water, and, it doesn't impact the farmer who sells the water. But of course, we're talking about agricultural resilience and sustainability moving forward. We've got to make sure that we are keeping these regional communities alive, and we know that buybacks have a very negative impact on regional communities. We know that buybacks are a really blunt instrument to try and recover water for the environment. And it is just so political. So the bit that frustrates me, and I know many other farmers, is that we talk about environmental outcomes, but we know that the majority of this is about political outcomes. And just really on that point, I thought it was disgraceful the way the federal environment minister called out Harriet Shing, the water minister here in Victoria, who has done a power of work in understanding the environmental outcomes and the economic outcomes of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan on Victoria. And the sentiment that was used was, oh, I can't believe we've got a Victorian Labor government, sticking up for their people, essentially. And that really demonstrates to me how political it all is. And it's about votes and it's about power in Canberra, and less to do with the environment, and certainly less to do with people who are irrigators, and even less to do with people who want to be able to afford Australian produce and have a resilient Australian farm sector.
Yeah, it's certainly become a huge political hot potato, that is for sure. The last time we spoke to you, you were seemed pretty frustrated about the state of potholes in major corridors across regional Victoria, and with good reason. Well, on Monday, we got the release of an economic report, and it painted a very dire position as to how we're going to get a roadmap to fixing potholes across the country. It's going to cost $1 billion, and this was courtesy of a report that came out from the Grattan Institute. So again, Emma, it's it's not news that we probably are surprised by, but I'll let you give commentary to this.
Absolutely unacceptable. I mean, I was out in country Victoria last week, and the state of the roads. I mean, we've got this increasing road fatality figure. And whenever we hear about road fatalities, we never talk about the condition of the road at the same time. It's always, driver fatigue or this reason, that reason, every other reason other than the state of the roads, we're certainly not looking in regional and rural Victoria and the rest of Australia, mind you, like we're living in a first world country with first world roads. It's actually quite dire out there. It's costing people their lives, and we can keep talking about it. And the longer we talk about it, the bigger the problem is going to get. We're talking about $1 billion across Australia. We put incredible pressure on local councils to try and fix their roads, and we know that they don't have the budget to do it. We know that they've got fewer and fewer ratepayers who are carrying a heavier and heavier burden all of the time, because there is just this simple inequity between metropolitan and regional Victoria, and of course the rest of Australia, but in Victoria, they need to start doing something about it now, because we're not even talking about how do we future-proof the roads, how do we make our roads more productive, safer, different routes, that sort of thing. We're just talking about fixing up potholes. And it certainly wasn't lost on me when I was driving on the Hamilton Highway last week. Horrific road quality. And then you see a couple of poor council workers who are shoveling little bits of gravel into holes as if that's even, it's not even a drop in the ocean. So the levels of government need to get together and actually work out a solution that's meaningful, because it seems to me like it's going to get far worse before it gets better. And we actually need to be having that conversation really strategically around, yes, we've got these damaged roads because we've got large agricultural vehicles using them now that weren't, necessarily as large historically as what they are now. And we need to talk about how does rail assist with freight to get some of those vehicles off the road. So there's got to be a whole picture. We see a lot of money being spent on things that I know so many Australians would say is a complete and utter waste, and things like basic infrastructure is getting left behind. So they need to get with the program, and they need to start funding the roads simply. And they need to be having forward budgets so that we can have planning around how you go about assigning contractors to the roads also. So this ad hoc, little bit of an announcement here and there when there's a budget announcement or when we go into an election, it's just simply not good enough. Regional Victorians deserve better. And at the moment, we're paying for it, and it doesn't make the road any better when I have to pay to fix up my wheels or my tyres or any of the other damage that happens. It's outrageous, and I've been saying that we need to have a road rage campaign about the state of the roads in regional Victoria.
Despite the issues we're always digesting, it's great to catch up with Emma Germano, the president of the Victorian Farmers Federation during National Agriculture Week. Thank you so much, Emma, for your contributions and your time. We'll speak to you again soon.
Cheers.
Emma Germano, the Victorian Farmers Federation president, rounding things out for us on this Wednesday afternoon on the Country Viewpoint. We'll wrap it all up after this short break.